It was just past midnight when raised voices pierced the silence of Buckingham Palace. Security guards froze. Aides braced. Behind those ancient oak doors, a storm raged, one that would ripple through every corner of the monarchy. Princess Anne had arrived unannounced, and what followed was a volcanic confrontation so intense, it would leave William with no choice but to act by dawn. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The night had started like any other, calm, still, and guarded in its tradition. But shortly after the final light dimmed in the West Wing, a convoy of dark vehicles pulled through the back entrance of the palace. From one of them emerged Princess Anne, her expression unreadable, her presence utterly unexpected. She was ushered through private halls under hushed urgency, her arrival known to only a select few senior staff. Tension rippled across the corridors as her footsteps echoed through the walls like a countdown. No one dared to question why she had come at this hour, but everyone could feel the weight of it, and within minutes it became clear Anne was not here for protocol or formality. She was here for war. Royal aides scrambled behind the scenes, unsure whether to alert the king or let the confrontation unfold. But it was too late to stop the tide. Anne stormed through the private residential wing, where a door slammed hard enough to reverberate down the hallway. Then came the shouting. A woman's voice sharpened with fury. A man's reply strained, defensive, and clearly unprepared for what was hitting him. Security officers exchanged glances, knowing full well they were witnessing history in the making, yet forbidden from interfering. For inside that room, it wasn't just family dynamics unraveling. It was the quiet collapse of royal decorum. William, awoken by a call from one of his private aides, had been briefed within moments. Anne had demanded an audience. And not tomorrow. Now. No time to process. No time to prepare. He rose, fully aware that his aunt would never come in the dead of night, unless it was something so explosive, so dangerous, that daylight couldn't contain it. As he made his way through the palace, the echoes of the past flooded his mind-strained Christmases. Fractured summer holidays at Balmoral, the whispers that had trailed this unnamed senior royal for years. He thought of his mother. He thought of his children. And he knew, in that moment, everything was about to change. Inside the room, the confrontation roared. Anne had reached her breaking point. Years of swallowing back rage, watching this royal manipulate situations, charm the press, deceive the family from within. She couldn't hold it anymore. She was tired of being the silent strength. Tonight she would be the voice that shattered the illusion. Her words were not measured. They were fierce, relentless, armed with truths William had long suspected but never confirmed. And when William entered, she did not soften. She pointed directly at the person she believed had undermined the very foundation of the monarchy. The person who had, in her eyes, desecrated the legacy their mother left behind. William didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The rage in Anne's voice, the tremble in her hands, said it all. As the clock pushed past 1 a.m, the weight of the confrontation settled heavily on William's shoulders. He had grown up under the shadow of secrets, of restrained truths and public facades. But tonight, those shadows were being dragged into the light. Anne's accusations weren't whispers, they were declarations. She had come armed with evidence, with witness accounts, with a fury born of silence. And William, standing at the center of the storm, could no longer pretend that the crown was intact. He knew what had to be done. He would act. Before the world awoke. Before dawn. But the truth behind Anne's explosive appearance was more than just anger. It was fueled by a secret she had guarded for years. And it was finally time to unleash it. Princess Anne had been called the steely core of the monarchy, but behind that calm fade lay a buried storm. For decades, she watched one senior royal manipulate, deceive, and destroy protected by tradition. But after what she discovered days earlier, Anne decided silence was no longer an option. And once she walked into William's private chambers, history was rewritten. She had carried the weight of this rivalry in silence for years. The senior royal in question had always maintained an air of civility in public, expertly navigating the institution while subtly sowing discord behind palace doors. To many, this person was a pillar of the royal machine, but to Anne, They were a force of corrosion, eroding trust from within. She remembered too clearly the summer at Balmoral, a gathering meant to heal after a public scandal, where a single manipulative gesture changed everything. The senior royal had twisted a private conversation, igniting chaos that pitted family members against one another and cast Anne as the villain. That incident never left her. It was the moment she knew this royal was not just cunning, they were dangerous. Anne had kept a low profile ever since, calculating her moves, gathering what little information she could without drawing attention. But what she uncovered in the past week ripped open every suppressed suspicion. A private journal, locked away in one of her late mother's old trunks, had been discovered by chance. Inside were pages dated and initialed entries that raised disturbing questions about the influence this royal had wielded over Queen Elizabeth's final years. The words weren't explicit, but the implications were unmistakable. Quiet fears. Doubts. A warning wrapped in regal restraint. And for Anne, it was the final blow. The realization that William had been deliberately shielded from these truths shattered her resolve to remain silent. She feared he would one day carry the crown, unknowingly propped up by lies spun in the shadows. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when the institution stood at a crossroads. She had watched her mother remain neutral out of duty. But Anne was no longer interested in maintaining peace if it meant preserving rot. She walked into William's chambers and told him everything, no filters, no political phrasing, just raw, unflinching truth. William listened in stunned silence, the words hitting him like a tidal wave. His mind raced through memories, interactions, patterns he'd dismissed. Anne wasn't speaking from resentment, she was delivering a warning forged from years of bitter observation. And when she begged him, through tightly clenched teeth, to act before more damage was done, he knew this was no longer a matter of family drama. It was about integrity, about legacy, about the soul of the monarchy itself. Anne's words didn't just shock William, they planted a seed of urgency. And that night he would confront the royal in question himself. This royal had evaded accountability for years, cloaked in charm and status. But behind palace curtains, whispers had long followed their every move. Anne's accusations painted a chilling picture of manipulation, betrayal, and private power grabs. As William prepared for the confrontation, he finally began to see the mask cracking and the danger hiding beneath. Outwardly, the senior royal had always embodied grace under pressure, the seasoned public figure who could handle a scandal with a smirk and a wave. The press often marveled at their resilience, their diplomatic touch, their uncanny ability to divert attention. But behind the carefully managed image was a deeply calculated operator, one who had quietly amassed power through manipulation and coercion. Whispers of secretive meetings and late-night calls had long circled this figure, but nothing ever stuck until now. Anne's revelations were like floodlights turned on in a room long kept dark. What William once dismissed as gossip now glared with new, damning clarity. One of the most alarming accusations Anne laid bare involved clandestine dealings with a select group of foreign benefactors. These weren't merely diplomatic relationships or philanthropic alliances. They were arrangements cloaked in confidentiality, involving personal favors exchanged for silent influence over matters the public would never hear about. Funds redirected, access granted, and policies shifted, all allegedly engineered to serve personal interests while preserving the illusion of royal neutrality. The thought that such backdoor dealings could touch the House of Windsor made William's stomach turn. And yet, as he combed through reports, internal memos, and fragmented briefings Anne had exposed, the pattern emerged, impossible to ignore. But it didn't stop there. This royal had over time embedded themselves so deeply within the palace advisory structure that several key aides were thought to answer to them more than to the sovereign or the heir. Manipulation ran like a current beneath seemingly routine decisions advisors turned into pawns. Agendas twisted subtly over time. Projects William had launched in good faith were quietly delayed, reframed, or shelved altogether. One such initiative aimed at reforming environmental practices within royal estates was publicly supported by this royal, while privately dismantled behind closed doors. William, who had long suspected sabotage, now saw the threads tying it all together, each tug leading back to the same person. Even more disturbing were whispers of internal whistleblowers' staff who had raised concerns. only to find themselves reassigned, silenced, or mysteriously forced into early retirement. These weren't isolated cases. They were a pattern of suppression, a systemic effort to bury any trail that could lead to exposure. One aide, in particular, had tried to contact William months prior, but was intercepted. Anne had tracked them down. Their testimony aligned with everything she feared and everything William needed to hear. The deeper William delved, the clearer it became that the persona he had once defended, even admired, was a mirage. What stood behind it was something corrosive. He wasn't just confronting a royal relative, he was confronting a threat to everything the monarchy was supposed to represent. And he could no longer ignore the cost of silence. Not to his legacy, not to the country, not to the crown itself. William knew he could no longer stay silent, and as the clock struck 2 a.m., he walked into the royals' private quarters with one demand: the truth. The air was thick with decades of tension. William entered the room without his usual calm. His voice, once steady, now trembled with fury. Anne followed, standing behind her nephew like a guardian of truth. What erupted next wasn't a conversation, it was war. Accusations flew. Secrets were exposed. And one phrase changed everything: "You've betrayed the bloodline." For a moment, silence clung to the walls. Then, with the weight of 1,000 withheld truths, William unleashed everything he had buried for years. No title, no royal protocol, no carefully measured diplomacy, just raw confrontation. His voice cracked as he confronted the senior royal not as the future king, but as a son, a brother, a man who had finally seen the web of deceit for what it was. He didn't ask questions. He demanded answers. And when the senior royal tried to deflect, to hide behind layers of polished denial, Anne stepped forward, placing a single folder on the table between them, evidence that shattered the illusion on which their power had long rested. The folder contained copies of confidential memos, letters, and notes, connecting this royal to decisions that had quietly destabilized William's efforts over the past decade. Projects derailed, meetings sabotaged, narratives twisted. Anne spoke with searing clarity, recounting how this royal had worked from the shadows, not for the crown but for control. And when William said the words, "You've betrayed the bloodline," it wasn't just emotional. It was damning. It was a reckoning. The senior royal's expression twisted into something unrecognizable. Their voice rose in defense, spewing blame and indignation. They accused Anne of jealousy, William of weakness, even suggesting that the monarchy had lost its strength under their leadership. But the desperation beneath their words betrayed the truth: they had never expected this confrontation to come. They had underestimated Anne's resolve and William's awakening. As the confrontation spiraled, William refused to flinch. He cited the late Queen's values, her unspoken expectations, the legacy she had entrusted to him. He called out the betrayal not just to the family, but to the institution itself, to the people they were sworn to serve. Then Anne, standing firm and fierce, invoked the name of Prince Philip. She spoke of duty, of honor, of the silent sacrifices their father had made to keep the monarchy from fracturing. He wouldn't have tolerated this, she said, her voice steeled with emotion. And neither will we. The words pierced deeper than any accusation. The senior royal's face fell, the weight of their choices catching up with them for the first time. William then made it brutally clear there would be no saving grace, no protection, no shielding from the consequences. He would no longer protect someone who had treated the monarchy as their personal playground, weaponizing loyalty and bending truth to suit their ambitions. This was no longer a family matter. It was a matter of national integrity. William's decision was firm. Whatever the cost, the illusion was over. The curtain had fallen. But this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it had institutional consequences. And before the sun rose, William took an action no future king had ever dared. By dawn, the senior royal's name had vanished from official correspondence. Their title stripped, their privileges revoked. What had been whispered for years was now official. William had drawn a line. And for the first time, even the palace staff were divided. A royal rebuke this severe hadn't been seen since Edward VIII's abdication. It began in the dead hours of morning, when a confidential communique was circulated through the highest levels of palace administration. The royal in question was no longer to be addressed with formal styling. Their military honors, once brandished with pride during state ceremonies, were rescinded. Their seat at royal functions removed. They had not stepped down. They had been pushed out. And it was William who had wielded the sword. The order was sharp, merciless, and immediate. Within minutes, centuries-old protocols were being rewritten by aides who could barely hide their disbelief. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was the eerie quiet of something collapsing. The command left no room for appeal. This wasn't a private suspension or a quiet retreat under the guise of health. It was a public and deliberate statement. Betrayal of the institution would be met with justice. There would be no family protection, no saving face. This was the monarchy cleansing itself from within. Staff members who had served for decades whispered to one another in corridors, stunned that a royal whose name had once adorned military ranks, official programs, and palace wings was now being erased in real time. Some were shaken, others relieved, but none were unaffected. Word traveled faster than the royal press office could contain it. A leak, perhaps intentional, slipped through the cracks. By mid-morning, major media outlets were already publishing fragments of the internal directive. Anonymous sources confirmed that a senior royal had been suspended indefinitely from all royal duties. The public didn't need names they knew. The outrage, the applause, the speculation, it all unfolded at once, while palace officials scrambled to spin the narrative into something palatable. But the truth had already sunk in. William had crossed a line that hadn't been touched since the monarchy's darkest upheavals. Behind the scenes, royal protocol officers were thrown into chaos. Who would take over ceremonial duties? How would historical documents referencing the disgraced title be updated? What would this mean for the royal order of precedence? These were not just symbolic concerns, they were questions with constitutional weight. And with no precedent to follow, the palace was improvising. Whispers of constitutional experts being called in behind closed doors began to emerge. William wasn't just acting as heir, he was redefining what leadership in the monarchy looked like. And not everyone was prepared for that reality. Then came the morning reactions from within the family. Queen Camilla, blindsided, reportedly demanded a full briefing. She had not been consulted. Her fury, according to insiders, was palpable. King Charles, still processing the fallout of the confrontation, was said to have remained in seclusion, refusing to make any public appearance. The royal household had fractured overnight not along generational lines, but moral ones. The decision William made wasn't just about discipline, it was about redefining what it meant to be royal in a new era. But while William had acted swiftly, not everyone in the royal circle agreed. A deeper civil war within the family was now brewing, and the public was watching closely. Camilla was livid. Charles was silent. The morning after the confrontation, royal dynamics were on the brink of collapse. Camilla accused William of humiliation. Charles, torn between his son and his decades-old loyalty, vanished from public view. Behind palace gates, alliances fractured. Anne, once isolated, now found herself at the center of a new power shift. The atmosphere inside the palace was volatile. Camilla, unable to contain her fury, demanded answers from the inner circle. Her outrage was not just personal, it was strategic. The senior royal, stripped of title, had long been a key ally of hers, a buffer within the palace hierarchy. William's decision, made without consultation, had publicly exposed a fracture that Camilla believed should have remained hidden beneath layers of protocol and control. She accused her stepson of wielding the crown like a weapon, of shattering the very unity they had all fought to maintain. But behind the venom in her voice was fear that her influence too might be slipping. Charles, meanwhile, retreated into silence. He refused to face the cameras. He canceled engagements. And within the palace walls, he remained secluded in his private chambers, reportedly refusing even to meet with his own advisors. Those closest to him say he was torn not just between his son and the disgraced royal, but between the past he had once protected and the future he had hoped to build. Some speculated that guilt played a role, that Charles had known more than he let on, and William's actions had unearthed truths he had chosen to bury for years. His silence was not a position of neutrality. It was the silence of a man watching the crown slip further from his grasp. In the midst of the chaos, Anne stood firm. She had braced for backlash. She knew William's move would not be universally welcomed, but she refused to retreat. When senior courtiers attempted to reframe the situation, suggesting softer language or a path to reconciliation, Anne shut it down. Her words were clear and unwavering. "We have shielded rot long enough." And for the first time in years, she was not alone in her conviction. William stood beside her. The lines had been drawn. And those who had once doubted her now began to question where their loyalty truly belonged. Legal advisors were quietly summoned to review the implications of William's decision. Though the title revocation had been internally enforced, questions loomed about its permanence. Could it be reversed? Could it be challenged? What precedent had been set? Behind closed doors, palace lawyers pored over historical records and constitutional frameworks. The monarchy had entered uncharted territory, and no one, not even the king, seemed certain of the next step. Whispers, meanwhile, hinted at a quiet move from Charles. In the midst of the unfolding crisis, he had allegedly reached out to Harry. The contact was brief, unofficial, and left many aides stunned. What had been said remains a mystery, but speculation ran wild. Was Charles seeking support from the estranged son he had once kept at arm's length? Was he preparing for something more drastic? Or was he simply reaching for the only person outside the palace who understood what it meant to feel betrayed by blood? The palace was no longer a fortress of unity. It was a battlefield of shifting loyalties. The old guard Charles, Camilla, and their carefully curated order stood on one side, clinging to a collapsing foundation. On the other, William and Anne, the unexpected alliance no one saw coming, now leading a movement for change, transparency, and truth. Neither side blinked. But the tension was unsustainable. And as the palace tore itself apart internally, the public reaction became something no one in the royal family was prepared for. Morning headlines screamed betrayal, heroism, and collapse. The British public, long divided on the royal family, now faced a new dilemma: support William's bold purge or question the monarchy's internal rot. Social media exploded. Former insiders spoke out, and calls for transparency grew louder than ever. What had been contained within palace walls for decades was now unraveling in real time under the harsh glare of the public eye. Overnight, hashtags surged Team William trended globally, followed closely by hashtag Royal Cover-Up. The internet became a battleground where opinions clashed with ferocity. Some praised William for doing what no royal had ever dared, protecting the institution by confronting its infection. Others accused him of tearing it apart from the inside, exposing the monarchy to instability at a time when unity had never been more critical. The truth no longer belonged to the crown, it was now in the court of public opinion. What escalated the storm wasn't just the outrage, but the sudden emergence of voices long kept silent. Former palace staff, once bound by loyalty and fear, began to speak. Anonymously at first. Carefully. But the stories aligned with Anne's narrative, stories of manipulation, internal sabotage, and a royal system built on fear rather than duty. These leaks didn't just confirm suspicions, they validated the moral stand Anne and William had taken. Sympathy swelled, not just in Britain but worldwide. Still, critics circled like vultures. Established commentators argued that the monarchy was collapsing under the weight of its own secrecy. Editorials questioned whether any royal could be trusted anymore. Was William a reformer or a rebel, destroying the very institution he was destined to inherit? The question echoed across television panels and podcasts, igniting a cultural reckoning over what the modern monarchy was supposed to represent. No longer was it enough to wave from balconies and shake hands. The people demanded truth. Speculation intensified about who could be next. Would others within the family be implicated? Were there more secrets hidden beneath the polished veneer of royal life? The press dived deep, dissecting body language, old photographs, archived interviews, looking for signs, for cracks that had gone unnoticed. The drama had become global, with news outlets from America to Australia covering the royal implosion like a slow-motion disaster no one could turn away from. And yet, amid the noise, one sentiment remained consistent: William had dared. In an age of image and silence, he had chosen consequence over comfort. Whether right or wrong, his courage ignited something long dormant, a public demanding accountability. Not from its elected leaders, but from its royal guardians. But while the outside world debated, inside the palace, one man stood at the edge of a personal reckoning: King Charles. For King Charles, this wasn't just about protocol, it was about blood, legacy, and fear. Watching his son dismantle the institution he had fought to uphold, Charles found himself isolated. With Camilla's fury growing and Anne's courage unshakable, Charles began to question everything, including his own past decisions that may have led to this night of reckoning. Alone within the palatial walls that had once symbolized his future, Charles faced the devastating weight of consequence. For years, he had shielded the senior royal out of loyalty, tradition, and perhaps deep down a fear of instability. Every time an accusation surfaced, every time Anne hinted at concerns, Charles had dismissed them, hoping silence would preserve peace. But that silence had become its own betrayal. Now, stripped of allies and surrounded by unrest, he could no longer defend the past without indicting himself. William's actions weren't just defiant, they were a mirror reflecting the choices Charles had refused to confront. And so, the king sat in the quiet echo of a fractured dynasty, estranged from both his heir and his sister. The very foundation of trust that had once bound the royal family had eroded. Anne, once dutiful and discreet, had become a truth-teller. William, the loyal son, had turned into a challenger of the throne's inner sanctum. Charles could feel the ground shifting beneath him, not just politically, but emotionally. The father in him longed to reach out. The monarch in him feared what that would expose. He found himself returning to moments-long, buried conversations with Queen Elizabeth about the burden of duty, the delicate balance between loyalty and leadership, the haunting warnings she once offered about what happens when silence replaces action. In the stillness of those reflections, Charles was forced to ask himself, had he failed her legacy? Had his inaction opened the door to the chaos now consuming the monarchy? The prospect of losing not just the crown's moral compass but its very structure became disturbingly real. The public no longer saw him as the calm hand of continuity. They now questioned whether he had the strength to lead. And in private, Charles feared they might be right. Desperate for grounding, he placed a quiet call to Prince Harry. The conversation, though brief, carried a tension laced with old wounds and unspoken truths. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a signal. Charles needed to hear the voice of someone who had escaped the palace's machinery. Someone who had once been exiled for challenging the same system William now stood against. The words exchanged were guarded, but one phrase from Charles stood out: "You were right about more than I admitted." And then, without warning, Charles disappeared from public view. Palace aides confirmed he had retreated to Sandringham, refusing visitors and delaying all official duties. But before leaving, he met with William one final time. No cameras, no courtiers, just father and son. What was said remains locked in shadows, but the outcome was unmistakable. Charles left the palace a different man, stripped not of his crown, but of his certainty. But just when the dust seemed to be settling, a final twist emerged: one last secret, buried deep in Anne's possession. And she was ready to reveal it. Locked away for over a decade, it was a letter Anne had never dared show anyone until now. Written by Queen Elizabeth herself, it detailed warnings about the very royal William had just cast out. It wasn't just validation, it was prophecy. And with those words, everything changed, not just for William, but for the future of the monarchy itself. Anne had kept the letter in a sealed envelope tucked away in one of her private safes, a letter written in her mother's unmistakable script, dated months before the Queen's health began its final decline. For years, Anne had wrestled with whether to reveal its contents. The words were personal, heavy, not instructions, but a haunting glimpse into the Queen's suspicions. She had chosen to stay silent while she could still watch over the family, but she knew that one day someone else would have to act. That day had arrived. The letter didn't name names directly, but the descriptions were impossible to misinterpret. The Queen wrote of a presence within the fold, clever in charm but corrosive in influence, and her growing fear that even those I love most may not see the danger until it's far too late. She spoke of a divided future, one that would require an act of painful clarity from my heir. And at the end, in words Anne could barely read without her voice cracking, the Queen urged her family to be brave enough to protect the crown from within. Anne handed the letter to William during a closed-door meeting with key members of the Royal Advisory Council. No cameras, no media. Just silence and legacy hanging in the air. William read it aloud. His voice, firm but thick with emotion, broke only once when reading the line, "My son must someday choose between comfort and truth." A single glance toward Charles, seated beside Camilla, was enough to shift the room's energy. Charles looked down, visibly shaken, as though hearing his mother's fears now, years too late, had pierced the armor of authority he had fought so hard to maintain. Word of the letter didn't stay within the palace walls for long. A leak, anonymous, perhaps intentional, reached the media within 48 hours. The headlines were relentless. "The Queen warned us." "Royal betrayal confirmed." "Elizabeth's final prophecy." The public, already stirred by the confrontation and title revocation, now saw the story in a new light, not just as a family feud, but as a final act of duty that began with the late Queen herself. Social media lit up in a frenzy of speculation and reverence, while supporters of William pointed to the letter as divine endorsement of his actions. Inside the palace, the power dynamics had irreversibly shifted. William, once bound by the weight of legacy, now carried it with purpose. Anne, long underestimated, was now seen as the unwavering keeper of truth. Charles, though still king, stood in the shadow of a new force, his son's resolve. And the royal family, once known for silence and spectacle, found itself at the threshold of something unfamiliar: reinvention. As the monarchy stands at the edge of reinvention, one truth remains. The midnight confrontation may have ended one reign, but it just began another. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.